Thank you all for joining. I'm Michelle Savage with XBRL US, and you're here for the public review for the OIM Taxonomy Specification Requirements document. We're very happy to have with us three key speakers. We're going to be starting with Scott Tice. Scott is the CEO of NovaWorks. He is also the chair of the XBRL US Domain Steering Committee and of the XBRL Technical Advisory Committee. Those are both XBRL US organizations. And he's also a member of the XBRL International Standards Board. We also have Herm Fisher, who is a software developer at XV. Herm is also a member of the XBRL International Standards Board. And then last, we have Campbell Pride. Campbell is CEO and president of XBRL US, and he is also on the XBRL International Standards Board. So we're going to start off our program with Scott, who's going to give us a little bit of background. And then Campbell is going to be addressing specifics about the OIM Taxonomy Specification Requirements document. And then we're going to open it up to questions at the end. So we encourage everyone to post questions at the Q&A link that you see on your Zoom console here. As we go through the program, we'll be taking those at the end. And if you do have any kind of technical issues, please let us know by sending us an email at support@xbrl.us, and we'll do our best to get you back online. So with that, I'm going to ask Scott to put on his camera and his audio and take it from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle, and good day, everybody. Go ahead, David, and go to the next slide. So we're going to start off today with a little background with respect to what it is we're trying to do, the big picture, if you will. And before I even start that, I just want to let everybody know that what I put together here is my view, and in consultation with XBRL International and XBRL US, but with respect to how this is kind of framed. So things are in the process of being developed now, and there'll eventually be publications. There already is one for public review that we're talking about today that will have the official positions with a lot of this information in here and impacting it. So I think it would help to start off with where we've been in this entire process. I hate to admit it with my gray hair that XBRL, along with working with Edgar and things like that, it's been around for a while. So the initial development of XBRL dates back to the late 1990s. And it was heavily reliant at that point on XML, because XML was very popular, was seen as a really good way to represent structured data. The specification we're working on now is actually fairly dated. It goes back to 2003, XBRL 2.1. There's been a lot of expansions to this between formula and link bases and things like that. iXBRL, if you're in the US and work with the SEC or the FDIC, you know that well. That's been a really big part of representing the instance data. One of the big things that happened about 5 or 6 years ago is we have the open information model, and the idea was to simplify and expand basically the standard and expand the instance formats. And that adds on to the different types of things that you can do aside from the initial XML and then iXBRL. When we start thinking about this outside of the US, there are over 200 programs and millions of entities that are reporting with XBRL. So, everybody who's been involved with this is extremely cognizant of being able to pick up from the legacy standpoint and support all of that effort and everything that's in there, and then move forward into a newer standard that takes advantage of a lot of the technologies that are available today. In addition to that, you can see 130 plus regulators. That's a lot. So when we look at how things are disclosed today, we have conventional XML instances or the original XBRL, inline XBRL. So in the US, that's going to be FERC. It's going to be the SEC. There are other things. We also have XBRL JSON that came with the open information model, and CSV. In fact, we're working a lot on table constraints lately with CSV formatting things. But the model, the actual thing that describes what data is being disclosed, the concepts, the structure, that's still represented in XML. So that's one of the big goals here, is to lift away from syntax. Next slide, please. when you start any project, it's really important. In fact, the most important, I think, of everything is to understand the stakeholders and their requirements. And I've listed off, just from my perspective, 5 major stakeholder groups here. And this has been the case going all the way back to the beginning of this. I mean, it's a matter of being able to prepare well-structured data that regulators can then use and that people then can access that. And of course, we've got preparers that need to be able to easily get that data into the model. And then you've got the consumers that need to be able to easily be able to access it and model it the way they want to model it, because they're going to put it in their own proprietary models and do their own research and do their own things with it. And then, on the bottom of that, we have the technology developers, which could also be on the top, because all these are extremely important. I mean, the technology developers have to be able to build tools that can support all of this. You can't be a data designer and build taxonomy models without tools to be able to build a taxonomy. And as a regulator, you can't, know what you're looking at without having tools to examine the data and do the things that you need to do. And as a preparer, you need to be able to tag, as we've colloquially referred to it over decades now, the information in an easy and consistent manner. So these are all very important aspects of that. And I don't think that this changes at all, depending on the application, whether it's XBRL or any system that's being developed. Some of the players will change, but the requirements and the groups are still going to exist. So in terms of what we're talking about today of the requirements, everybody who's in one of these domains should really be looking at what the requirements should be for a new model going forward. Next slide, please. Yeah, trying to get my computer to cooperate here. So as we've been going forward over the past probably 10 years to at least, particularly the last 5 years, we have to look at what some of the existential risks are to XBRL in itself. One of the biggest things that's happened, and it's hard to ignore. I mean, you have to be living under a rock to not know that AI is playing an important role in everything from medicine to data analysis to research, you name it, it's involved. And a really big problem that we have discovered is AI doesn't really ingest XML very well. And that's particularly true of the model itself. So if you want to try and figure out contextually what something is with respect to other items in the model, you need to be able to have that taxonomy available. In fact, and the taxonomy, as many of us know, also has the authoritative references with respect to what some of these things actually mean. So that really significantly limits the utility of the data that is being presented when you ask AI a question. And of course, another big part of it, we saw that in Washington, D.C. at the beginning of December with respect to that data forum, that there's a lot of hallucination problems and whatnot. And I think it's really critical that AI be able to pick data up, that instance data up, and be able to represent that data accurately, and then also be able to explain what the underlying model foundation is of those particular data points. In addition to what we have here, and for those of us in XBRL US and working with that, we know that we have the Financial Data Transparency Act, and it has requirements in it that that kind of go a little bit beyond the scope of where we are today. One of them, for example, is PDF, PDF-A or PDF archive. And I think as a larger organization internationally and in the US, we need to be able to support all these things going forward. So we have to have a good platform to do that. Next slide, please. So as we've already mentioned here, the scope and the demand has definitely increased. The current model doesn't support capturing granular data. This is a whole nother area or domain with respect to transaction information, everything from how many aircraft operations you have at an airport per hour, per day, per week, per month. How do you easily represent that? With the FERC, we can see that there are some forms that have a lot of data that's being reported that isn't really super suited for being in the conventional mode that we've had now with XML. XBRL CSV tends to help with a lot of that, but the taxonomies aren't really tuned to that. So it's another thing that we need to deal with. The formats themselves, that is the syntax, it's not ingestible by AI. External add-ons and things like unit registries and data type registries are not very consistent, and we need to fix that. And if you think about it, that original 2.1 spec, it's getting up there in age. Next, please. So what we're looking to do here is, building the future of XBRL. I've always felt, working with XBRL, first of all, I'm not alone, I'm sure, in the fact that XML in and of itself with XBRL is complicated. It's a bit of an uphill climb to get into that. But what you end up with what has been designed is that XBRL is unique over and above a lot of other ways to represent data, because the data can be modeled and represented in a semantic model. It's not just an Excel spreadsheet that's got headings and rows in it. You can go and dive in and say, what does this concept mean? Where did it come from? What rule does it apply to? And that lives on forever. So when you look at it 30 years from now, you're going to be able to see what that reference was. It's going to have essentially a authority trail, if you will. So the data model, because of that, in many ways is self-describing and self-documented. Of course, a lot of that depends on the taxonomy designers putting in the effort to do all of that. And at a certain level, the data is self-validating. We definitely know that with data types and things like that, as part of XML, you can pick one of hundreds of different data types that are in the registry, ranging from how energy is represented to monetary facts to things like that. And you validate at that level, but you can validate with respect to doing a certain level of calculations. But when it comes to what belongs to what cube and how that calculation actually relates to each other, it leaves a lot to be desired with respect to being able to do things with that. So when we get into talking about the requirements, and then why are we talking about requirements? We have goals. So first of all, why are we talking about requirements? Because I think that having a set of agreed upon requirements with respect to the project to begin with does a lot in terms of speaking to how the end specification should be created for whatever we're going to call it, whether it's going to be version 3 or OIM taxonomy. I'm not sure what it's going to be called along, but either way, we have to think about having something to kind of rally around and make sure that we're handling all of the different requirements. So what are the goals of this? Ease of consumption, AI enablement, intuitive comprehensibility, meaning that when I pick up and want to read that data, can I pull that in and comprehend what it means? Right? With XML, that's very difficult. With other formats, there's a lot of options now today that are a lot easier to deal with. Enhanced performance. This is particularly true when we've gone from having, let's look at the SEC initial documents that 10Q might have 200, 300, maybe 500 facts if you're a banking institution, to now 3,000 or 4,000. You get into BDCs, we're talking about tens of thousands of facts. You start talking about, for example, energy generation or things like that. You start getting into hundreds of thousands of facts, or not be more like millions of facts. So we definitely need to have a lot more performance. Anybody who's been dealing with looking at some of these larger things in an inline viewer knows very well that the browser with JavaScript tends to choke on this stuff when you start having tens of thousands of facts. Consistency in modeling. How is it that the data is actually modeled? Is it consistent, and can it connect well with other components? And improving the validation. Errors were a major consideration early on here in the US. With respect to the gap taxonomy, everything from what sign is put on a particular fact to the scaling of it. Well, with the data quality rules now, we do a lot of work with respect to, does this actually belong on the report? Is this consistent with the other information that's being reported? We want to be able to do a lot more improved validation without having to go through and write all these really complicated rules. They should be built into the taxonomy. Next slide, please. So the next generation, I'm calling it here, the OIM taxonomy specification. but that's essentially we're going to have an open information model. And what are the implications? It's that simplification in the modeling. It's the focus on intent, not the technical details. We're trying to make this be syntax independent. We want the conceptual aspects of XBRL to be represented in this model, and then being able to put that into whatever syntax that you select as a developer, as a designer. We want to accelerate that development. I can tell you just recently we built tools for FERC, and we did that in .NET, and it turns out while .NET has XML support, it kind of sucks when it comes to dealing with XBRL. So we actually do that all outside with our specific platform tools with our XBRL model. We want to have enhanced flexibility. We want to make it much easier to adapt these models as requirements evolve. And then we also want to be able to empower collaboration. We want non-technical stakeholders to be able to jump in and look at this and go, oh yeah, I understand how that works. Here's my take on how we should change this, or how we should look at it, or I want to reference this data. I don't need to understand what XBRL is. That shouldn't stand in the way. The model should be intuitive for me to go, oh yeah, okay, that's part of this particular area in this regulation, and I can bring that data in and use that data. On to the next slide, please. So in this process, which is a long process, and it's a lot of work, where are we? Well, we've got to a major milestone here, and then we have draft requirements. Campbell will be talking about that in a moment, and the link is here. I could ask David to also put the link in the chat or in the or there's a pickup so you guys can grab it. We have the OIM working group that meets weekly on Thursdays. It's 9 a.m. Eastern time, and that covers a lot of the details. We've been hammering through this stuff. We do have a prototype that we've been working with and changing and modifying things. In addition, here in the US, we have a bi-weekly XBRL Technical Advisory Committee. That's a little more informal, that we discuss concerns and how to approach these things, and then we bring those to international. It's mentioned here, many parts of this I have already been in the works. Campbell has made some Zool programs that basically would take an existing taxonomy. In fact, he's taken dozens of taxonomies, GAP, IFRS, et cetera, and put it into the new model. And legacy support to lift up is considered very important. We have preliminary RL support to be able to display in conformance with this. And I think if a firm wants to talk about that later, we certainly can. And it's kind of interesting looking at the power of AI. Campbell has built a taxonomy explorer using AI, and it has taken significantly less time to build this particular thing that at some point we'll put out in the public to explore the data that got converted in and how does the new taxonomy look. Next slide, please. So a big question, and this is the third time that we've been talking about this. We didn't have the requirements before. Is people wonder, well, what's going to happen today with all the stuff that we're doing today? Well, it's going to be supported. It's going to be supported into the future for a long time. I would envision certain stuff being easily converted up, particularly for consumers. So when they look at the critical mass of existing taxonomy information, that that data is brought forward to use, or to say use this data in models to compare, long range. If I want to look back 5 years and you just convert it over to the new format, you're going to be able, you need to be able to pick up that instance data and have it go into the new model. And I don't think that's an issue at all. We really are going to be able to do that type of stuff. Your requirements, that's where we are right now in that phase. It's not finalized. We want your input. We really need to have people looking at this and saying, hey, you didn't talk about this, please add that. Go ahead to the next slide, please, David. Okay, so from a public standpoint, the launching point is the taxonomy model requirements. And that's where I'm going to stop and hand over to Campbell to talk about the requirements document. And then we'll open for questions after that.
All right, thanks, Scott. Okay, so Scott's covered quite a bit of this already, but so if you want to go to the next slide, please, David. All right, so if you haven't seen this, David's put the link in the chat. to the requirements document. And so this is what you should see come up when you click on that link. Just some background on this. So this is the first set of requirements that have been put out. This is for public review. We wanted to get something out so we could solicit feedback from people in terms of what they think should be in the requirements. It was a lot longer when we originally started out, but we've kind of cut it back to kind of like really the high level, as many high level requirements as possible. So it's not too technical. It doesn't really get too much into the technical details and tries to set out like the high level requirements that we're going to try and achieve. So if you go to the next slide, David. So the document is structured just in the overview, introduction, deliverables, and then the goals. These are the broad, number 5 is the broad goals. And Scott talked about these a little bit, but this is really about ease of consumption, AI enablement, intuitive comprehensibility, performance, and consistent modeling. So that's kind of what we were trying to get to. And then the section is broken up and goes into a little bit more detail in terms of the requirements that will achieve that. You will notice at the start of the document, there's also a definition section. And this is something a little bit different than what's been done before in XBRL documents. It kind of gives an individual link to each individual requirement, so we can track each requirement and make sure that it gets addressed. So if you have specific questions about things, then you can just drill into that specific requirement. So we tried to isolate each, rather than just being a large document, try and make it easy to read and kind of be punchy so that you can see stuff. So the document's not particularly long, but there's quite a lot in there. But what we wanted to do is read through that, and really what we want to hear about is, because we may not, particularly from your perspective, of issues you may have had with the standard, or problems, or things you couldn't do, or things that seem complicated, and then please provide feedback on that, because we really want to capture basically as many requirements as we can, so we can make sure that the final specification will address those. And it may be relatively easy to address, so don't feel like it's a big problem and it can't be dealt with. We want to basically get as much feedback as we possibly can. And if there are improvements that you think could be done, and things that you've tried to use XBRL for and it hasn't really worked, we want to hear about that as well, so we can make sure that that gets considered in the final specification. All right. You go to the next slide, please, David. All right, so this kind of, in terms of one of the main goals, one of the requirements here is really trying to simplify how things work. One of the risks with any of this is that we make it more complex than it currently is today. That is something that everyone is well aware of, and we want to make sure that we don't go down that path. So one of the things we do want to avoid is complexity. And one of the ways we're trying to do that is not really worry about the syntax, which is, like how the XML should be structured, or if it's in a JSON format, how that should be structured or whatever, but more about what are the semantics. And this is really talking about things in the way that business users or people who are using data report information. So we're trying to make it more high level. So we're not talking about XML fragments, but we might be talking about things like, this is a footnote, or this is a piece of information, a fact that I want to report, or this is this is the concept, this is what it's called, and try to use everyday language and keep the model based around that, so that it becomes a lot more simpler for business users to use it. The other thing we want to do is make it easy for developers with minimal prior XBRL knowledge to pick it up and quickly understand what's going on. And this has been a problem in the past. There was like quite a steep learning curve in terms of people trying to learn XBRL. So we want to try and make that curve as flat as possible, so that people can quickly spend an hour or two and kind of get an idea, okay, I see what's going on, and they can start using it, rather than having to understand XML and Xlink and a number of other standards that are deployed. So we're trying to push this down to as low a level as we possibly can, so that starting from zero to being able to use it is as short a path as possible. And the other thing we are trying to do is, obviously, to have a lot of knowledge of 2.1. We don't want to have people go and relearn everything again, and all that knowledge gets binned. So a lot of this, when you look at this, a lot of the terms, a lot of the expressions, a lot of the way you've used XBRL will stay the same. The same concepts are used, and things that seemed a bit clunky, it should seem simpler in terms of how it shouldn't appear as clunky as it used to be. And there's a lot of things in there which were kind of complying with the XML syntax, which made things seem kind of didn't make sense so much. So like, we're giving a data type on things like an abstract. An abstract can't have a data type. So there was like redundancy in there, which didn't seem necessary. So a lot of the stuff that kind of didn't make sense, we're trying to remove, to try and simplify it, but still use the same concept. So the knowledge that people already have is still going to be relevant. So go to the next slide, please. Okay, ease of consumption and creation. So one of the things we're trying to do is move this to an object level modeling. So what this really means is talking about things and defining things for what they really are. If we're defining a footnote, we have an object for a footnote. So if it has that word, if it's called a footnote, that's what it means. It's a footnote. So a lot of the content that we had, we were trying to make sure that they're included in objects that make sense. And then you can directly reference those. So we have this idea today, like if you've got a balance sheet or it's a statement, you had to make this complex modeling to pull it all together. So now we should be able to say, okay, we should be able to reference, this is the balance sheet, and I can reference that directly. So, there was a lot of problems, particularly people trying to consume the data. They couldn't find the balance sheet, things like what are all the different groups and how everything was organized. You had to put, letters in front of it. So you got the order. In many ways, you were kind of fighting the syntax versus what you're really talking about. So we're trying to basically eradicate that. So it should be a lot cleaner for business users. They don't have to understand the details of the semantics to be able to put their data together. The other thing was to model consistency. So basically, in XBRL today, you can identify things in multiple different ways in the syntax. So that made it kind of tricky to basically identify something. So as an example, you might have the concept's name, it had the name, but then there was also something called URIs, if you're talking about roles, and there were also identifiers. So you kind of didn't really see it, but if you had a tool, but underneath the hood, there's a lot of these identifiers floating around. And that made it difficult for developers, but then users, it would also surface and users would have to deal with it as well. So we're trying to simplify that. And then allow concrete definitions for things like a balance sheet. If you put that in a cube, for example, you might have different, that balance sheet might be defined, different balance sheets might be defined in a report. That sometimes the calculations would run, there'd be overlaps between them, things weren't discrete. So it was often difficult to, there were kind of strange things you had to do to model the data. So we're trying to clean all that up as well. Okay, next slide, please. And enhance performance and improve quality. One of the things we want to do is basically add some extra stuff in there so it makes it, things that people complained about. So one of the things that we've seen is, the US GAAP taxonomy. People say, okay, I want to use it, but I only want to use these 4 or 5 elements in it. I'm a construction industry, I only want to use these construction elements, or I just want to use these 3 elements. Like net income, but I've got to bring the whole US GAAP taxonomy in. So one of the things we want to try and do is you should be able to point to those things you want, and that would you would only bring those 3 things in. You don't necessarily have to load the entire model and validate the entire model. So what this is doing is trying to basically allow what you want without having the burden of bringing in the entire taxonomy into your software. So this is good too because it improves comparability. People don't go and create their own concepts because they don't want to use these taxonomies because they're too big. And then this should lead to improved validation. We can use the same validations on those concepts, can be used across multiple models. We're also improving validation as well by trying to make relationships apply to what they really belong to. One of the problems we've struggled with over the years has been calculation inconsistencies. So if you define a calculation that goes across every single fact in the document that you reported. So you get this, we have these terms like bleed through, where it tries to do a calculation. The calculation can't be done because it's trying to, reconcile between the opening balance and the closing balance of a prior period. There's only partial amount of the facts are there. So these kind of issues we're going to try and address as well, so that we don't have false positives, which are just kind of a pain and waste everyone's time. So if we can address those, that would improve validation because people don't have to check stuff that's not relevant. And the other thing is to enforce things like enforce required disclosures. If you're required to report certain information in a report, there's no real way to enforce that in XBRL. So we have things like filer rules that regulators publish that say, hey, you've got to do this. So that's another thing you've got to go and look at. If everything's in one place, then it just makes it a lot easier for everyone involved. Okay, we go to the next slide, please. Okay, one of the things that Scott had mentioned, obviously AI is something that everyone's using a lot more of, and making AI, this is not a matter of not only making XBRL available to AI, but the data available to AI, but being able to use AI more effectively to create documents in an XBRL format, be able to create taxonomies in an XBRL format, to be able to create models that the AI can actually consume and create new models. So this is about really just making it as easy as possible for AI engines to be able to use both the taxonomies and the instance documents. And as part of going through and developing the specification and creating unit tests, we've used AI a lot, and used AI to give suggestions in terms of how things could be improved. So there's been a lot of AI tools being used in the development of the specification and the requirements. And so it's one of the things we're trying to do is just make sure that the standard will optimize that as much as possible. And then also means that as time goes on, we make it flexible enough so we can add additional objects as we need to. Okay, next slide, please, David. Okay, so the requirements document that we referred to earlier, please look at that. Don't read through the whole thing. There's things in green that you can look at. I would, if you don't have much time, just read the things in green. And if you look at those and you don't agree with them, or you think there's a problem with them, that would be probably the first thing to start with. So it's pretty, that's probably going to take 10 minutes or 20 minutes just to read the green items and the requirements. That's kind of like the high level requirement. If you don't feel it goes far enough, then provide other suggestions as well. That would be great. And if there's things that are completely missing, then just put that in. It doesn't have to be a big story or anything. It may only be a sentence or two, just so we can pick that up, because obviously we don't know everything that everyone else knows. We only kind of can put into the problems or the things that we think would be a good idea, and would solve problems that users have. So please look at that. And if there's particularly use cases, that's really useful as well. So if you have a situation, we try to do this in this disclosure, for example, and we couldn't model it, and it was ambiguous, and it was really messy, and it was impossible to update every year. If you can give us use cases of that would be extremely useful as well. Just to make the case, obviously developing a specification is just not a bunch of people sitting down in a room and coming out with something because everyone in the room doesn't agree on everything. But if there's use cases which back it up, then it means that there is actually a need for it. We don't want to put things in the specification and that someone thinks is just a good idea, and there's never really been a case for it in the past. And finally, they're published that should be changed. So if there's something that's that you think is completely wrong, then we want to hear about that as well. Anyway, so this is the first public release of this. So this is the first go. So this is certainly not final. But there'll probably be another 2 releases of those requirements going forward. But we want to get those in, get those turned around, and get an updated document out in the next month or so. Sorry, next month after February, I think is when they're due. Yeah, the public comment is due for this document is on February 16th, 2026. So get those in, and if we can, hopefully we can take a couple of weeks, turn those around, and get those incorporated so we can release an updated document in March. Then on the specification side, we are taking those requirements and we're using those as the basis to prepare a specification, a first cut at this. There's actually quite a lot in there. There's kind of a lot of work that's been done over the last 25 years. And so we want to basically support the functionality that's already there. We don't want to really limit what's being done with the current specifications. In some cases it might be done in a slightly different way, but still we're trying to capture that same information. We're not going through and saying, oh, we're going to get rid of labels or anything like that. It's really just a matter of making sure that we can find the most efficient way to do things, which will meet all the requirements, but at the same time provide the same level of functionality that the current specification has. Okay, then 3, we're trying to get a specification out by summer 2026. And then when that specification comes out, that's just not going to be a document. That would also be have unit tests, have example code, or have processes that run it. So you can play with it and have examples of the different use cases that have come up. So, one of the things we're doing, as Scott mentioned, is taking existing taxonomies, put them in the new format, taking existing filings, put those in the new format, take new types of data and put that in the format, things like general ledger information, things like time series data, things like listing of securities or investments, things like listings of inventory, whatever it may be, and have that in the format so people can look at it, they can play with it, they can see how this stuff is modeled. If you want to know more, you can get involved. If you're an XBRL US member, you can join the OIM working group. You can get access to a lot of this stuff and see what's happening. So I think we've left some time for questions. I think we've had a few. I haven't had a chance to look at them yet, but.
Great. Thank you, Campbell and Scott. Thanks so much. And we do have some questions. And Herm, if you can put your camera on too. We've been getting a bunch of questions coming in. And we're going to go through these questions kind of one by one. So the first question that we received, there are inherent conflicts between the goals of the data designer and preparers and the technologists and consumers. For example, presenting data to support preparers' pitch versus structuring the data for consistency to be consumed. Please outline the approach to resolution and how the OIM can help handle that kind of conflict.
You want me to take that one, I guess? Okay, I'm trying to understand what's underneath that. I think the preparers, if I just think of most of my work is SEC, so the filers to SEC present their data using currently today HTML to present it in a format that they wish, and the structuring to be consumed is provided by a taxonomy and is provided by filing rules that are layered on the syntax of the taxonomy. What we are doing with this next taxonomy is merging together the modeling and the semantics of what the model represents. So I'm again, maybe Drew, if I didn't get your point, the difficulty is that when you have one set of syntax with here's the company name, here's an assets amount, here's some other thing with a lot more dimensional breakdown, that structure of the data related to the FASB taxonomy or the IFRS taxonomy and filing rules, but it didn't relate to, gee, you presented this in this kind of a balance sheet or face statement, or what the semantic use of the data was. The big change with the OIM taxonomy is modeling semantically what the data is intended to be. This is a balance sheet. These are the things that were previously filing rules that are now logical rules on something being a member of this balance sheet and being valid. And that should help harmonize this, presenting the data with what the structure is, if I get your drift correctly.
So just so just jump in there, Herm. So like one of the things we're trying to do is to make it easier to get it. Like you've got this data if you're a company, for example, and you have this information, you have it in a native format. What we're trying to do is to reduce those barriers from getting it from the native format you have into XBRL format. So one of the things we're trying to do, and one of the requirements is here, is to say, okay, if you've got this information in this format, we should be able to map to that easily and map at the semantic level, which Herm is talking about. So then you can bring it in. So you're not struggling with the syntax. How do I put this in? How do I get this? How do I take this data that I have? You know, the burden goes on the person reporting the information to understand the syntax and put that into that syntax. So one of the things we're trying to do is to try and eliminate that and drop that barrier to the lowest point possible, and use technologies which, you know, the vast majority of people understand. So then that should make that significantly easier.
Yeah, I think that one of the big things here, though, is there's no magic bullet with respect to how data models are designed and having that done in a thoughtful and meaningful manner, and then how that deals with legacy information. You take a look at FERC, it's very form-based. So their data model is essentially the forms that are there. And people who are preparers have to get that data from their existing systems and models into a format like that. And you have the same kind of a thing with the with SEC documents, and I'm sure it exists in most environments. I think what's important is we build tools and technology that don't get in the way of that, but help promote being able to do it more easily and allow software developers, regulators, everybody to build better models and better ways of getting the data in and being able to consume the data and understand what the data is.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to the next question. How are validation and data quality controls expected to evolve under OIM, particularly for dimensional consistency calculations and completeness checks? I don't know who wants to jump in on that.
Well, we've moved things that are like in the XBRL guide into things that can now be expressed in the cubes, we call it, or you could think of it as report sections, so that it's a much more cohesive and specific way of expressing the model semantically rather than syntactically. The previous dimension specification was a syntactic expression of what could be validated. And now we're unifying those things. So if we look at data quality rules, most of them now become semantic rules for the cubes that are in the model. And they're all in one place. They're not scattered between guides and rule languages and things that maybe AI couldn't go find or find in different places when they're trying to understand the data.
Great. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? I think, one thing just in that specific question about evolving, I think what OIM is intending to do is put a semantic structure in place that can evolve as new syntaxes are developed, new types of modeling. And so, if anything, I think that the entire OIM specification is really set up to evolve and change over time. I don't know, would you all agree with that, or?
I'm not sure.
Well, I think it gives flexibility to do some of this stuff, but you have to look at the point now where we've got 10 years on TQC and a lot of experience under the belt with respect to how filings are created and the kind of data they have and the conflicts and the errors and the problems. And I know Campbell, who's doing a lot of the heavy lifting with respect to this, has put a lot of thought into how can we make that data more consistent and more error-free, and build a model that allows you to do that more easily. So we don't have to spend all this time building so many rules that are compensating for issues with regard to the model.
So at the end of Ram's comment, he's got calculations and completeness. Calculations in the 2.1 days were something global that ran across all the data and all the cubes or sections of the report, which meant if you have consolidated mixed with non-consolidated, the calculations all, they interfere with each other. So we fixed that. The completeness checks go in with the cubes. If you need to report these things in this section of the report, it's in the model. It's not in some compendium somewhere on the side. That's a big difference.
Okay, let's move on to so the next question here is, research shows that large data providers like CompuStat don't use XBRL for data collection and standardization. Why do you think even large data providers are unable to use the standard for data collection? And I guess my first question on that is, do you agree with that large data providers are not using XBRL for standardization?
Well, let me answer that. So there are a number of data providers who actually do use XBRL for making the data available, and there's a number of providers who are doing that. Now, some of the large providers like CompuStat, just so people understand what their process is, they will typically take a financial statement document and then they have their own normalized view of the world. So they'll take that data and they'll put all of that data into a standardized bucket so people can do standardized analysis. So they have existing processes that they use to do that. So these existed before XBRL came along. So there has been, obviously they've got to junk all that process if they wanted to move to XBRL. And I think that's been something that has restricted them from doing that. We do normalize the data as well. So we have normalization routines which take that data and normalize it. And one of the problems with that is if there are data, you want to try and make that process as totally automatable as possible, so you don't have to have any human involvement in the normalization at all, because that reduces the cost. People like CompuStat, and some of the other large providers, it's a very, very manual process. They have automation, obviously, but then there's obviously got to pick up the cases they don't know. And so I think one of the things that has hindered total adoption of this is you want really, in the XBRL, you'd want very high data quality. And that's one of the things the DQC that Scott mentioned, which was the Data Quality Committee, which is a committee we formed to try and improve that Data Quality Committee is doing, is so we can get to that point so it's possible to ingest this information and standardize it with as little human touch as possible. What this proposed specification is trying to do is trying to address that, that last 20% of thorny problems, which kind of result in those data quality problems. So the cleaner we can make the model, then the idea is that we can kind of get to that nirvana of being able to automate from normalization. I don't think it's possible. You're going to have someone involved in the process, obviously, to try and normalize it. But this comment is true in the extent of if it could be totally automatable, and why isn't it? And this specification is hoping to address those issues that we are aware of in the current spec that haven't been able to smooth those out.
Okay. What specific structural or semantic improvements in OIM most directly enable advanced analytics and machine learning use cases?
That's an easy one. In 2.1, expressing the semantics of what's in a filing or a taxonomy is dispersed throughout the syntax of link bases, and almost every different kind of an application uses the link bases differently. They're in an XML syntax that is not readily consumable by AI. What we've done here is to build an object model. We don't really care what the syntax is. The semantics are expressed in objects, and the objects are in a form where they can be understood by LLM type processes. So I think the big difference is that we've got a consistent and clear and obvious way of expressing the intent of each of the different sections of file data and what goes in there and what it's meant for and what can be included.
Great. Anybody want to add to that, or? Okay, so let's go on to, for a non-XBRL engineer or analyst, what specific steps are eliminated when consuming OIM compared to XSD plus link bases?
not having to subject people to this horrid syntax that we're the only user of. When we started XBRL 25 years ago, Xlink looked like it was really interesting because we all like, relational data, network type databases and stuff. And we got enamored with something for which we were the only users and for which the syntax became arcane. And the syntax is all consuming if people are if you're involved in building tools or validating reports. We're taking you away from fighting syntax.
Well, and I think to some extent too, like XSD and link bases, you need you need XML type processes, and generally the industry is moving away from using XML as a standard. So there's a lot of other in other formats. There's a lot more options available to consume this information. So we want to make sure that we make that as open as possible. The object itself, that what is being referred to in this question, XSD and link bases, is very semantic type stuff. There have been initiatives over the last 10 years to move away from this, particularly with things like putting XBRL data in a JSON format or putting it in a CSV format. So that's just going to be a lot more. The reason for that is to make this information a lot more accessible. This is not the first step away from that. This is just a continuation of that initiative to move towards other syntaxes which people are more familiar with today.
And
I
those
think,
others. I was going to
go
say
ahead.
those other syntaxes should be consumable by LLMs without needing specialized tools or specialized libraries in the LLM. That to me
If you
was
look at the
our
prototype
goal.
stuff right now that has been done in JSON, if you wanted to just go in and enumerate the concepts that are within an XML taxonomy, you have to go through a lot of parsing, a lot of effort. Within a JSON modeled version of the OIM, you can just go ask for that node and have it pull that out. That's with existing technology that's already built into various programming languages. So I think by having more modern tools and a simpler setup and a more semantic setup, it's going to make it a lot easier to access information.
Okay, the next question
You slap this new stuff into AI and it knows what to do with it. You slap the old stuff into AI and nothing.
Okay, the next
And
question.
it's a taxonomy for the taxonomy. The data can be consumed. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
Sorry, Herm. Okay, the next question is from an individual asking about extensions. We have found that extensions can be hard to consume. Will the OIM support better use of extensions or better consumption of extensions?
Yeah, I think, okay, I'll answer this. So the idea here is this is something that the filer says we have, which the base taxonomy says we don't have. So you'll still have, we don't expect that this is getting rid of extensions. People are still going to want to basically define something that is specific to themselves. The idea here is that the proposed specification will basically incorporate a lot more semantic expressiveness natively into it. So you'll be able to, and this will depend on the regulator. So the regulator would be able to say, you've got to provide this additional information about this extension. It's not only it rolls into assets, but maybe it's at net realizable value, maybe it's an accrual, maybe it's a contra to another thing. So the idea here is the ability to define the properties of an extension will be available, and that's up to regulators if they want to use it or not. But one of the features that the specification has is the ability to assign properties to things, which really didn't exist in the past. So this means that if you've got extensions, you'll be able to programmatically work out what something means rather than having to parse text to try and determine what it is, or rely on the presentation or the calculation, which may not be entirely accurate. One of the problems we've had in the past is people create extensions and they don't link it, they don't put a calculation in because it's going to cause an error. So the current specification addresses those issues, so you're not going to get false positive errors as well.
I think plus what Campbell mentioned earlier, when you are extending something, you say you don't have to say give me all of IFRS or US GAAP. You say this is what I need for this application that I'm extending. You select it down to what's relevant for the application.
Great. Okay, the next question is the idea of converting existing taxonomies into the new OIM. I guess, what's the anticipated complexity of mapping from an old, from XBRL 2.1 into the new specification? And will there be any tools provided to enable that? And I guess my other question, which is kind of outside of this, is that expected? Will existing regulators have to convert their existing taxonomies in XBRL 2.1, or can they maintain those taxonomies as they are?
All right, so I'll go for the first question. So we've created some tools to automatically create the new taxonomies from the old taxonomies. So that is possible to do. They asked the question about, is it going to do it in contradictory ways? The problem that we found in doing that, there were some contradictions that did happen, but that really pointed out errors in the base taxonomy models that had already existed. By doing that, we found errors in those taxonomies. So I think if those errors are fixed, then yeah, you can pretty much get from one taxonomy to the other in a purely automatable way. There are some assumptions that you might not assumptions, but techniques you may want to use, like how do you rename things, because sometimes you got to combine stuff in the old taxonomy to create a new object. So it's totally that's what we're doing today. So I don't think this is necessarily an issue. The one issue is if you have a new taxonomy and you want to go back to the 2.1 taxonomy, you are gonna lose information because there's a capacity to capture more information in the new model.
Okay, the one question we got is, I'm
well,
sorry.
then the second part of the question was there's no obligation for regulators to move from 2.1 and to new. This is the point of this specification is to enable the ability to capture new data sources. So you can be able to capture a lot of data that's currently captured by regulators that don't even consider using XBRL because it's not appropriate, particularly transaction or position-based data. So that will become available to do. So this is, as a regulator, it's not really do I have to move off 2.1. The question is, do I have any data collections that I currently do that maybe this specification would be better for capturing?
Great. And another question that we got is about some of the examples that were referenced. Will any of those examples be made available to those who are interested in reviewing the requirements document and eventually the other documents that come out from the working group?
Yeah. So they will be made available. At the moment, it's currently the spec is in development. As part of the XBRL International Specification Development process, all of that information is only available to XBRL International or XBRL US members, or any member who is a member of any jurisdiction of XBRL can have access to that information. If you're not, then you've got to wait to the first public release of the specification to come out. That's one of the stick and carrot type processes that XBRL International offers to get people involved in the spec development process.
Great. Well, I think we're actually out of time, and we've covered all the questions that have come in. I don't know if you all want to have just some final remarks on how to get involved, how to be part of this. I don't know, maybe I'll turn it over to you, Scott, since you kind of kicked us off here.
Sure. I think involvement, even if it's just reviewing the materials that are being made public, is super important. It's paramount. And if you want to get partly involved and just simply attend some meetings and raise issues, that's certainly welcome. I think a better forum for the U.S. is to do that via XTAC. The OIM meetings tend to be a lot more structured with respect to merge requests and particular topics. That's much more formal. XTAG is not that formal. So you can come in and ask these kinds of questions and we can address them. And then if we feel it's appropriate, bring those forward to international as part of the spec development process. As is in the link already is the info@xbrlus.org. Just feel free to email and ask anything, and we'd be happy to come back and answer your concerns, your suggestions, the things you think it should do or should not do. we want to hear from you. I think that's the big part of this, is getting the community involved in terms of building the future specifications.
And Scott, just as a quick reminder, I think you mentioned it earlier, but XTAC is the XBRL Technical Advisory Group, which is
Correct.
formed under the Domain Steering Committee. So you do need to be a member of XBRL US to join that. And but anybody who is a member, we encourage you to join that. It takes place every 2 weeks, and you know, you get a lot of information, and you really get some insight knowledge into what's going on with the specification. And if you're not a member, please consider joining. So it's a great opportunity to be part of what's going to be some, you know, major initiatives going forward this year. All right, well, I want to thank everybody. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you for our speakers. And, you know, we'll have more on this coming down the road. We'll have more documents coming out explaining more about the specification. And please take a look at the requirements document and get in touch with us if you have any questions. So,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.